Welcome to Celebrate Michigan. I'm Matt Beiser.
I'm Christy Darian. Have you ever had a great idea for a children's book but just had no idea how to get it from your head and onto the paper?
Well, our next guest got her inspiration for children's books on a vacation to Tequananum Falls in Upper Michigan. It's a story of a little boy's magical discovery of an inchworm named Mimi.
She began writing as a teenager, and as a young girl, she spent her time reading, writing poems, and painting outside among nature. She's a wife, mother, and elementary school teacher. And if you ask her, she will tell you that one of her favorite things to do is to read stories to children. Her new book is entitled Mimi the Inchworm. Welcome, Sue Balash, to Celebrate Michigan.
Thank you very much.
It's great to have you on our show.
Nice to meet you, Christy. Nice to meet you, Matt.
We want to start by congratulating you on your first publication.
Thank you. It's very exciting. I have a lot of stories. Most of them take place in Michigan, but this is the first one that I've actually had published. It's exciting.
And we understand you've been writing for a long time.
Since I was about 16, a high schooler, I read a lot of Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau and was really inspired by my English teachers and wrote a lot of poetry and stories back then.
What was mostly the subject of your writing back in that time?
Believe it or not, it was nature. I would see a sunset and come up with a poem about it, or I walk in the woods and feel the same sorts of things that Thoreau would write about, and just write those stories. Ernest Hemingway was another big influence. Love to read his stories, can't write like that. Write more for children now, but nature stories was usually the biggest theme.
And let's talk about this book just a little bit. It is Mimi the Inchworm. How did you come up with the story?
It is funny because people will ask, what's your title? And I say Mimi the Inchworm, and I feel a little sheepish that I've written a story about an inchworm. But we were actually on a trip to Tequananum Falls with our boys a couple years ago. They were about 15 and 13, and they had this notion. We camp with them all the time, and we were camping near Charlevoix. And they had this notion, they wondered if you could touch all 5 Great Lakes in one day and how they would go about doing that. We came
Sounds
to
like a whole nother book.
It does, and it is another idea. I've also jotted some ideas down about that.
Oh, cool. It's
something that we're going to try someday, but we figured we could do 3. So we started at Lake Michigan, and we drove up across the bridge. It happened to be the 50th anniversary of the Mackinac Bridge that day, or that year. We drove across the bridge and spent some time in the UP. We touched Lake Huron while we were in St. Ignace, and then we drove up to Whitefish and touched Lake Superior and ended up right at sunset time in Tequananum Falls. And the boys, as competitive as 2 brothers usually are, were racing to see who could get to the falls first. And of course the older brother won, and the younger brother felt small and insignificant, and flopped his elbows down on a little post and found an inchworm there. And the story came by me just watching him. He ended up playing with this inchworm, and the older brother came back down after seeing the upper falls and said, what do you have there? And started to play with the inchworm too. And the 2 of them forgot about the waterfalls that we were there to see. And they played with an inchworm that just absolutely delighted our whole family. And the story sort of came from that, and finding just tiny things in nature, things to notice that just can delight your soul.
So what is your process from having this story now and creating a book?
Well, I have a lot of stories that I've never written down or submitted. I have some that are written down, but I write in my head all of the time. I notice things. I teach my students in elementary school to try to notice things and eventually write them down, but then I myself wasn't writing things down. I actually had a friend who nudged me and said, you can't share your stories with children unless you write them down and try to get one published, and then you can have it, in the bookstores and do assemblies for children and things like that. So I took her nudge as maybe I should start this, and I submitted the manuscript, and the publishing company, Nelson Publishing and Marketing, they liked it and thought that it had a good message, so they decided to publish it. So it's my first one.
So was it your students then that was the final push to do the publication?
Well, the idea that I can't really share stories with students unless I sit there and tell them everything that's in my head, but it was actually a teacher friend who said, you really need to write one of your stories down and give this a shot. So I did.
And I'm sure they like the pictures too.
Yes, and the illustrator is a wonderful watercolor artist from Ontario, Canada. When it came time to put pictures into this book, we had to take a look at a few illustrators to see who could capture the way that the nature felt up in Tequamanon Falls, and the delight of the young boys as they played with a little inchworm. And we found Rita Viscount. She's a watercolor artist in Ontario, and she just did a magnificent job.
So what was it like working with her? Did you get to proof the illustrations before they got put into the book?
Oh, it was excellent. When you work with Nelson Publishing, the author is part of the publishing team, so I was there for every step of the way. And when I met her, I knew instantly she was perfect. You know, she said, what kind of light would you like here? And let's look at the foliage that's really there in Tequamanon Falls. We researched what dragonfly is there because that's one of the characters in the story. And she took a look at some other books that I suggested to her, and I also gave her a CD of the pictures that we had taken because when we're off in the summers, that's what we like to do also. Out in nature, we're also always photographing. I gave her a CD of the pictures of Tequamanon Falls and pictures of my boys there, pictures of the real inchworm that they played with.
Wow.
And she took that and ran with it, and she just, like I said, did a phenomenal job. I couldn't be happier.
That must be exciting to be involved in the whole process of getting the book published and choosing all the details.
It absolutely was. I shared in an assembly at my own school recently with all the children there that it took 7 edits. You know, I first wrote the story down, and I thought, oh, it's just perfect. It's just the way I want it. And I learned, you know.
You worked with it till you got it the way you wanted it.
Yep,
Cool.
I learned. It takes a while.
Well, when we come back, we're going to talk more with Sue Balash about her book, Mimi the Inchworm.
Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Celebrate Michigan. We are talking with Sue Balash, a 3rd grade teacher who has written a book called Mimi the Inchworm.
We want to get back to nature for a little bit here. We understand part of the goal, part of the inspiration and the goal of your writing is to get kids outdoors and into nature where they can experience it.
Yeah, we talk about that a lot, getting the kids unplugged and getting them out where they can be themselves and sort of be inspired. I read Richard Louve's book, Last Child in the Woods, a few years ago, and I was really just struck by it. I also got a chance to hear him speak at a teacher conference, and everything that he said about getting kids connecting with nature, it just really struck a chord with me. And that was actually before I wrote this story down. It's everything I've thought to always do with my own children, get them outside, you know, paddle a river, do all these things that they ought to do, climb a tree. It's okay if they scrape their knee. They learn to not, you know, climb so rigorously.
Especially the nature we have here in Michigan.
It's so beautiful. I have yet to see every place there is in Michigan, but it sort of was my goal to make every setting of every book that I write a setting here in Michigan. It means more to me to do that. Even though we visit national parks and things like that, Michigan is just so dear to my heart.
And you get your class involved in that too, right? You get them outside.
We do, yeah, I get them outside. I do as much as I can outside, but even indoors, I read them nature stories. If I am showing them any sort of video, we just did My Side of the Mountain with the kids last year, and they're 3rd grade. They're 8 and 9 years old, and that is such an old movie. They were spellbound by it. They couldn't believe that a 12-year-old boy would go out and live off the land and catch a hawk and have a raccoon for a pet and things like that. So they loved that. And then when they write, I have them bring in photographs of not only their family and their favorite things, but I ask them to always bring in some sort of nature photograph that they could write from, that they could describe. And we go outdoors. Every February we do the Great Backyard Bird Count with the kids, and we submit information that's true citizen scientist information to Cornell University and the Audubon Society, and
Wow.
I have kids come back after they've gone on to high school and say, do you still watch birds outside your classroom? And you know,
Of course.
yeah, we have the bird feeders out there. I get them out there doing activities. You know, we're trying to compost a bag right now in my classroom, so I get them outdoors as much as I can.
And is that part of what Mimi the Inchworm is about, is getting kids outside? How does that book
there,
do that?
There's a part in this story where I really focus on the older boy tells the younger boy who's feeling sad that he lost the race to the waterfall. The older boy says to the younger one, "You're really lucky because you always find the tiniest things in nature." And that's one of my favorite lines in the book. There's another line where the dragonfly is talking with the inchworm, and of course that's the fictional part of the story. The dragonfly is telling the inchworm that everything on earth has a purpose, and because the inchworm herself feels small in the vast wilderness of Tequamanon Falls. So just trying to pull those themes out. The story actually ends up being more of a self-esteem story, you know, feeling good about yourself and things like that. But the nature is just infused in that story. So.
Cool.
That sounds great. Now, when your kids, you give them assignments to write, and when they get writer's block, what do you do?
Oh, there's a bunch of things that we do. I actually let my kids stare out a window if they need to. In their writer's notebook in my classroom, their writer's notebook is plastered with pictures, and it's actually laminated. We do that in the very beginning of the year so they can stare at the front cover if they need to get an idea. They can write about a person they see, or they can write about a place. Sometimes I'll read them a story first to get them inspired. And sometimes I just give them, you know, that thinking time. We write off of photographs, like I said. Sometimes to get them really focused, we can do some things that may sound kind of weird, but I can get kids to kind of work on their brain a little bit, and I have them actually put their fingers together, and they sort of look through their hands, and they have a centering technique that they do. It sounds a little yoga-ish, but they put their hands together, and they touch all their fingers together, and they look right through their hands, and then from there, their brain really quiets. They can just get very quiet, and they stare through their hands, and then once their brain is quiet from everything that's going on around them, their own thoughts come out. And then they put their hands down, and when their own thoughts start flowing, they start to write. I do it myself as a writer. If I have writer's block, I'll either stare out the window, or I'll stare at something in nature, or I'll watch a tree sway back and forth so I can quiet my own thoughts. And once your thoughts are quiet with everything that's going on around you, you can focus on what you want to say.
It is very meditative.
Yeah, I don't really want to stop.
It's something I actually learned at a teacher conference, so a way to get, you know, all of the inside to focus down and quiet. You know, it's just neat.
Interesting.
Do you find that most of your students like to write about nature also? Have you inspired them to do that, do you think?
I've inspired a few. The reality is that you can't inspire 100% of them, you know, inspire 100% of them to do exactly what you'd like them to do. There are kids who will write about their video games and things like that, and I constantly just encourage them to get that life of theirs unplugged and find something that's real, that's tangible, that, you know, that can be more meaningful to them. So when I model writing at the front of my classroom on the overhead or on a screen or things like that, I'm always modeling that type of thing, a nature story or a story that has a message, relationship between kids or friendships or things like that. So my modeling is always just sort of trying to nudge those ideas, but kids are going to write what they're going to write, and, you know,
not much you can do about it.
Not
as long
much.
as they write something,
as long
you're
as
good.
they write, right. And then I can, you know, teach them the skills through whatever it is they're writing. But
Okay.
yeah.
It's so many interesting things.
Yeah. Well, when we come back, we're going to talk more with Sue Balash about her book, Mimi the Inchworm, and we're going to hear a little excerpt from it.
We are. So stay
Very exciting.
tuned. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to Celebrate Michigan. I'm Matt Beiser.
And I'm Christy Derry. And we are talking with Sue Balash, a third grade teacher who has written a book called Mimi the Inchworm. Now, we'd really enjoy hearing a little excerpt from the book.
Okay, I can do that. And I think a nice way to show where the setting of the book takes place in the beautiful land of Michigan, at the end, I did some author's notes. I like to read author's notes in other people's books, a little bit of information that goes with the story. So I have a page here that talks about visiting Tequamatum Falls State Park, because that's where the story began. Just a little visit, and then a story came to life in my head. And it says here, if you were to cross the Mackinac Bridge and head north to Paradise, Michigan, you might actually find an inchworm like Mimi in Tequamatum Falls State Park. Before you found one, though, you would most likely stop to read signs that would tell you amazing facts about the wilderness around you, facts about its vast 45,000 acres of beautiful land and more than 40 miles of hiking trails. Of course, you might also learn that the Upper Falls is nearly 200 feet wide and drops about 50 feet to the river below. You could also find out about the 13 different lakes or the 125 different species of birds that nest there. You could see something as magnificent as a waterfall, as large as a moose, or as tiny as an inchworm. All you have to do is pay close attention. Wow. And that gets to the message of my story that I try to teach children, is just pay attention. There's so many things to see.
There's so much information in there too. I was hearing actual measurements of the falls.
And I did a lot of research.
You paid attention.
I paid attention. I did. While we were there, we took photographs, and there is another. Without giving too much of the story away, there is another part that I had to have in this book, where it says, "Take only pictures, leave only footprints." And as we visit state parks around Michigan and national parks, wherever it is that we go, we've always taught our sons that. And you don't take the nature with you. The nature stays where it is from, and you can take pictures. And that's what we do mostly. We take photographs, and we don't leave anything behind. You talk about your carbon footprint on the earth. You don't leave anything behind, and you leave the place even better than when you came upon it. So that's something I teach my own boys and my students in school.
So what advice would you give to an up-and-coming writer who had an idea and they just didn't know how to get it from their head and make it into a publication like you have?
Well, I would say write the idea in different ways and then choose your favorite. The biggest thing is to pick up the pen, because I told my friend that was trying to encourage me, I write in my head all the time. I write in my head while I'm drying my hair in the morning, while I'm driving to work, while I'm eating lunch, I'm writing in my head. If I don't pick up the pen and have a notebook nearby or set aside some time to just write it down, I wrote it in one way and it got changed 7 times. So if you write it a couple times and think to yourself, well, what would my audience be? Who would I be writing this for, and what message am I sending? You'd be able to pick the version of your story that you may want to submit as a manuscript to a publishing company.
Okay.
So,
But pick up that pen.
Pick up that pen. Pick up the pen and keep a pen with you, and paper at all times. It's hard to write in your brain. It gets a little discombobulated up there once in a while if that's all you do is write up there. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, Mimi the Inchworm is not only about getting people outside and getting unplugged. I know you mentioned paying attention when you're outdoors. Now, but there's a deeper message to Mimi the Inchworm, isn't there? What else is happening in that book?
There is. There's a message that it's a parallel story, really. There's the 2 boys that are racing to be the first to see the waterfall, and then there's also Mimi herself, who feels very small and insignificant, and everyone goes racing past her to see the magnificent waterfall. No one pays attention to her. And the dragonfly in the story is sort of her mentor and says, you just pay attention. You wait and see. You do make a difference. You are important in this world. And after she interacts with the boys and the boys leave the park, the story comes back to her. And she's astounded at how the boys had paid attention to her, and the boy who was upset now had a beaming smile on his face, and she couldn't believe that she's the one that put that smile there. So she learns by the end that the world is a better place because she's in it. And that's the overlying message of the story.
Wow. Do you see your students pick, or anyone else who reads the story pick up on that?
They do, yeah. They love it, and they I share my website with the kids, the SueBethBalashBooks.com, and they log on to that website and they tell me either how they've noticed something in nature, or they tell me how they've made a difference in someone's life, even if it's tiny, even if it's small, like Mimi.
You've got such an incredible book. What do you have in the future?
The story that I'm working on now is about a little girl who is on vacation in Ludington, Michigan with her family, and she can't get to the top of the lighthouse. In Ludington, you can actually climb to the top of the lighthouse and view the scenery from the very top. Mm-hmm. They let you go up there, but she can't because she has a heart condition, and she cannot climb the, I believe it's 139 stairs or something to the top. And it happens to be her birthday, and when she's sitting down on the beach while her family climbs the lighthouse, they sing to her from the top. And she turns and looks up at her family, and they're singing happy birthday. And the next story is called The Biggest Birthday Candle.
Wow.
So the lighthouse appears to her because the sun is there. It's shining on the lens up in the lighthouse, and her family's singing to her. And it's just working on making that just a very endearing story, and working on the message of that too, that you have to know your limitations, but that the world can still be beautiful from whatever perspective you see it.
Another great message there, and another great Michigan location.
It will be a Michigan story, for sure. There will be, the monarch butterflies will be featured in that story.
Cool.
That as, they're waiting to take their big flight across the great blue down to Mexico, and they're all over the milkweed plants on the shores of Ludington. So the little character in the story is going to interact with those butterflies in the story too. So I'll have the same sort of angles in that story too.
So if somebody wants to purchase this book, where can they go?
Well, they can purchase it. It's at Barnes & Noble, Borders. It can be purchased online. It's on Amazon, straight from our publisher's website, Nelson Publishing and Marketing, and right off my own website as well, SueBethBalashBooks.com.
Okay. Do you have any last words of advice or words of wisdom for all of our viewers out there who are inspired right now?
Oh, well, take the time to find places in Michigan to discover. And parents, read to your kids even if they're teenagers. I still read to my boys if they will let me. But unplug those kids and take them outdoors.
Get them out of the house.
Yes, absolutely.
Make them take a pen with you, too.
And take a pen and notice things. Take a camera and join that initiative, No Child Left Inside. Don't leave them inside where there's no imagination to be had.
Well, thank you so much for being on our show today.
Thank you so much, Christy.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you.
I feel like I've learned a lot from Mimi the inchworm as well.
Oh, good, good. You can have this copy.
Thank you.
That's for you.
Wow.
I hope you'll share it with
So
some
excited.
children.
Oh, of course, of
Well,
course.
thank you for tuning into our show where we celebrate Michigan together.
We'll see you next time.
Thank you.